Hi, welcome to Curriculum Night 2020 at the Children's School. Usually I would be standing in front of you in the school gym. We would be getting to see each other in person. Instead, this year I'm at home and I'm recording this for you so you can watch it at your own convenience. I want to start by thanking you for this opportunity to address you. I'd like to share some of what has been on my mind as I think about the Children's School, our curriculum and pedagogy, as well as progressive education and its roots and its relevance to our current moment in history. Many times in this curriculum night speech, I have talked about the history of progressive education and invoked names like Francis Parker, John Dewey, Carlton Washburn, Horace Mann, in order to ground the educational philosophy of the children's school in its historical progressive roots. So this is an unusual year, and maybe that's why I'd like to do something a little different here tonight. I'd like to offer a critique of the historical roots of progressive education, at least as those roots are generally understood. What I've been realizing lately is that there are many historical figures who should be considered founders of progressive education, who have important things to say to us and teach us today, but who we never seem to hear very much about. I'm thinking of Booker T. Washington, whose Tuskegee Institute was famous for its project method, for teaching not just facts and skills, but inquiry and problem solving, for connecting educational content to students' own experiences in furtherance of their democratic prospects. And this was 30 years before John Dewey. And I'm thinking of Carter G. Woodson, who wrote The Miseducation of the Negro in 1933. He advocated against what he called the machine method of learning, and he advocated for education that was relevant and meaningful and based in the real life needs of Black folks in America. And I'm also thinking about the freedom schools of the 1960s, created to counter the so-called sharecropper education given to Black folks and poor white folks at that time. Again, the focus was on educating people for participation in civic life and as change agents, and the methods used were discussion and questioning rather than rote transmission and memorization of facts. And when I think about these people and read their work, it seems that the history of progressive education has been pretty drastically whitewashed, and that we have willfully or ignorantly discounted the contributions of non-white thinkers. This is, of course, unfair and unjust, but it is also impoverishing because we're deprived of their amazing ideas. We miss out on a complete, nuanced, sophisticated understanding of progressive education by limiting the range of scholars we look to define and explain it. Meanwhile, and this strikes me as not coincidental, many people in progressive schools, including the children's school, are sometimes asking themselves, why are progressive schools so often seen as white? Why can't progressive schools attract and retain more students and teachers of color? What is going on? Now, there are probably many answers to that question, but I want to suggest that one answer might be progressive schools tend to talk a lot about the white men who created progressive education. And so just for tonight, for as long as this speech lasts, I want us to refuse to participate in this whitewashing of history. I want us to refuse to go along with the story that progressive education was created by a few white men in the early 20th century, when in fact, progressive ideals have been alive and well in Black and brown communities for at least as long, if not longer. The crux of it is this: we need to search for and honor all the roots of progressive education in order to understand and embrace all of progressive education's potential. And boy, do we need progressive education's potential right now. Times are tough. We are living through a global pandemic with physical and mental health, as well as economic, political, and social implications. And we are living in a time of civil unrest, as centuries of American racial injustice are being examined and confronted again because we failed time and time again to adequately examine and confront them before now. As adults, we may feel that we're living in unprecedented times. For our children, though, it's a little different. They don't have the life experience, maybe, to know how exceptional these circumstances are. Instead, they're trying to do what children everywhere are trying to do: grow up, learn, understand the world around them, and figure out their place in it. And then, as a logical extension of that growing up and figuring out process, children and young people are working to change what they find that is bad or wrong. All over the world and all over our country, young people are advocating for peace and justice and equity. Progressive philosophy tells us that for true learning to occur, the topics and ideas must be relevant to children and to children's lives. Everyone says that: Dewey and Parker, and also Washington and Woodson and others. So we need to ask ourselves, what is important to children in these times? What do children need right now? What children need most right now is love, stability, and reassurance. They need social opportunities, time with friends, time to be silly and imaginative and creative, time to play. They need to feel loved and cared for and seen and heard. They need to find joy and beauty and fun in their lives. If we provide nothing else for our children this year, that will already be a lot. Now is not the time, if it ever was the time, to focus on standardized test scores, metrics and grades, reading levels, and timed math tests. Instead, now is the time to make sure that children's curiosity and wonder are nurtured, that their voices are empowered, that they feel confident in themselves and their own importance and dignity, that they learn about how to live and work in community with others, that their own voice is important, but so are the voices of others, and that the relationships they have with parents and guardians, with teachers and other caring adults, with siblings and friends and family members, those relationships matter most of all. Please don't hear me saying that academic skills are not important. Academic skills are hugely important. Reading and writing and mathematics and all the discipline-specific content of science and social studies and the arts and other branches of human knowledge, these are hugely important. However, acquisition of skills and rote memorization of facts are not an end in and of themselves. They're a vehicle for these other more foundational and ultimately more important types of learning. So, a progressive approach to teaching and learning, like we have at the Children's School, an inquiry-based, constructivist approach with room for student voice and student choice, an emphasis on social-emotional learning and democratic processes, all of that is good. It is wonderful. But on its own, it's not enough to truly be progressive in the finest tradition of progressive education. Progressive philosophy teaches us that children learn in a social context and that their intellectual and social emotional learning are inseparable. That is why focusing just on academic skills is not enough. And even why focusing just on inquiry and democracy and student voice is not enough. Because no matter how hard we might try to shield and protect them, our children are learning in a social context that includes global health disparities and racial injustice, among other things. And so, to return to our original question, what do children need right now? What do they need to grow up and figure out their place in a COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter world? They need academic and intellectual structures that help them analyze power, access, and equity across race, gender, culture, religion, and other differences. They need practice and guidance analyzing structures of power, structures that provide context for everything else that happens in the world. They need intellectual experimentation and risk-taking. They need critical thinking and the confidence to act on those critical thoughts. These concerns are at the forefront of progressive educational philosophy today. The most exciting scholars working in the field, Bettina Love, David Stovall, Paul Gorski, and our own Ayanna Brown, Kate Shostrom, Miranda Johnson, and Asma Ali. These scholars are urging us to confront and address these realities because they are so very relevant and meaningful to students' lives today. And the teacher's art, which our teachers excel at the children's school, is to bring these big topics and ideas to children at their developmentally appropriate level, to equip students to understand the world around them and to see where they can take action to improve it. Just as Washington and Woodson and all the teachers of the Frieden schools and many, many others have urged for their students for well over 100 years. I'll leave you with a quote from The Miseducation of the Negro. Real education means to inspire people to live more abundantly, to begin with life as they find it and make it better. That is what we are doing at the children's school. That is what we are hoping to inspire in your children and in you. I will close there. I want to thank all of you, our children's school families and our teachers and staff. Thank you for being here and listening to this. Thank you for the trust you place in the children's school. Thank you for partnering with us and with each other to care for all the children and families in our community.